Part of the fun of making movies is that it's all make-believe. Take our stuntman who pretended to drown so well for us today. Well, he can go on to be shot off a horse in another film tomorrow, or fall harmlessly through a burning roof the day after that. But for the more than 8,000 people who suffer death by drowning in the United States each year, there is no tomorrow, no happy ending like in the movies. And yet, many of these tragic deaths can be prevented if people like you and I would learn how to properly handle a drowning emergency. Now, before we meet Dr. Heimlich, who will be showing us how to save a drowning victim, we need to understand how death by drowning can occur in the first place. During normal breathing or respiration, air with its life-sustaining oxygen is brought into the lungs by way of the trachea or windpipe. Once in the lungs, the oxygen is absorbed into the bloodstream for circulation throughout the body. When a drowning occurs, the victim's vital respiration process is halted. The result is a form of suffocation which can soon lead to serious brain damage or death. So as you can see, proper emergency life-saving measures must be taken as soon as possible. There is no time to be wasted, especially on rescue techniques which may not be effective. Now let's take a look at some of the techniques that have been tried over the years. Recognizing the importance of removing water from the lungs, people in the late Middle Ages would roll drowning victims over barrels. In the 17th century, along the canals of Europe, the drowning person would be draped over the back of a horse and bounced as the horse was trotted along. Then in the first decade of the 20th century, the Schaefer prone pressure method was introduced. The rescuer would press against the victim's lower ribs as a means of artificial respiration. This method, which was also observed to be effective in expelling water from the lungs, was widely practiced until early in the 1960s when it was abandoned in favor of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And yet, despite the widespread use of the mouth-to-mouth technique, drowning victims continue to die. With me now is Dr. Henry J. Heimlich, who will demonstrate a new and revolutionary technique for saving the lives of drowning victims. The technique, as I understand it, uses the now famous Heimlich Maneuver, originally developed by Dr. Heimlich to save choking victims. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I suppose I should begin by asking, what are the principles behind the Heimlich Maneuver?
Well, when a person is choking, an object, such as a piece of food, blocks the airway and prevents oxygen from entering the lungs. Now, there is always a substantial amount of air in the lungs. The Heimlich Maneuver consists of compressing the lungs to cause this air to flow out the windpipe. The safest and most effective means of performing the maneuver is by applying upward pressure on the diaphragm. Here. As the diaphragm rises, air is forced out of the victim's lungs, and the obstruction will then pop out of the choking person's airway, much like a cork from a champagne bottle. The action can better be compared to compressing a bellows. The object is actually blown out of the throat.
All right, but how does the Heimlich Maneuver apply to someone who is drowning?
In the vast majority of drowning cases, water has entered the lungs or airway. By using the Heimlich Maneuver, this water is forced out of the lungs, allowing air to enter. A simple experiment illustrates this point. Let's go over to our demonstration table.
Okay.
All right. Now, when I insert this straw into a glass of colored water, the straw fills to the level of the water in the glass.
Right.
If I remove the straw from the glass, the water drains out of the straw. Now watch this. I'll put the straw back in the glass, but this time I cover the upper end of the straw with my finger. Now when I lift the straw from the glass, the water remains in the straw. The same is true within the lungs of a drowning victim who is not breathing. This is why merely tilting or jackknifing a person to drain water from the lungs has long been recognized by medical authorities as a useless procedure. Surface tension and atmospheric pressure keeps the water from coming out.
Well, what about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Why won't that work?
The reason mouth-to-mouth won't work is, again, because of the water present in the victim's lungs or airway. Try it yourself. Fill the straw with water and cover the ends and lift it from the glass. Now blow forcefully on the other end of the straw. You see, the water moves a bit, but does your exhaled air reach your finger?
No, it doesn't. So administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to someone whose lungs or airway contain water may not do any good.
That's right. As a matter of fact, the water in the drowning person's chest may move, as in the straw, causing the victim's chest to rise slightly, and this chest movement may mislead the rescuer into believing that his efforts with mouth-to-mouth are succeeding, when in truth they are not. Instead, the water in the air passage blocks the rescuer's exhaled air, preventing the oxygen from getting into the bloodstream.
So what you're saying then is that before mouth-to-mouth resuscitation can be effective, the water must first be removed from the lungs.
Exactly.
And that by performing the Heimlich maneuver, the upward pressure on the diaphragm, which compresses the lungs, will force the water out?
Yes, just as by applying pressure with my fingers to the straw, it forces water out of the straw and allows air to enter. The Heimlich maneuver forces water out of the lungs each time you push upward on the diaphragm. This is the same principle that was proven effective for expelling water from the lungs of drowning victims by rolling them over a barrel, draping them over a trotting horse, or performing the Schaefer prone pressure method. All of these methods compress the lungs. The Heimlich maneuver is preferred, however, because it is the safest and most effective method for squeezing water out of the lungs.
I think I've got it now. First, using the Heimlich maneuver, get the water out. So how do we perform the Heimlich maneuver?
Let's begin by showing how it's performed on an adult. First, place the victim on his back. Then, make sure that the head is turned sideways so that water can flow easily from the mouth. If the head can be lower than the feet, such as on a sloping shore, this will also help. Once the victim is properly positioned, kneel astride the hips. Locate the bottom of the rib cage. Place one of your hands on top of the other with the heel of the bottom hand on the abdomen, slightly above the navel and below the rib cage. Now press into the abdomen with a quick upward thrust. When there is water in the lungs, water will gush from the victim's mouth. Repeat the Heimlich maneuver several times until no more water is expelled.
Very good. Now, what happens next?
Well, in the many instances reported to us in which drowning victims have been saved by the Heimlich maneuver, once the water was removed from the lungs, the victims spontaneously began breathing on their own.
What if after the Heimlich maneuver has been used, the victim does not start breathing on his own?
In that case, other emergency measures must be taken. When the Heimlich maneuver no longer causes water to flow from the victim's mouth, or, as happens in a small percentage of drownings, the lungs do not contain water, begin mouth-to-mouth artificial respiration immediately following the final Heimlich maneuver. Also, if a person skilled in cardiopulmonary resuscitation, that is CPR, is present, he or she should check the victim's pulse. If there is no sign of a pulse, then CPR should be administered, but only by a person who has been fully trained. In any event, mouth-to-mouth artificial respiration must now be started immediately after the water is expelled.
Would you show us how this is done?
Certainly. Let's go back to our demonstration area.
Good idea.
Andrew will use this special mannequin for our demonstration. Notice first that the victim is on her back following the use of the Heimlich maneuver. This position is the proper one for receiving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as well. Now, place one hand under the victim's neck and lift up, using the heel of your other hand to tilt the forehead well back. This is done to extend the neck and open the air passage. Keeping the victim's neck extended with one hand, use the index finger of your other hand to clear out any foreign matter which may be in the victim's mouth or throat. To administer mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, first pinch the nostrils closed to prevent air from escaping. Then place your mouth over the victim's mouth, forming a tight seal. Begin by giving 4 quick breaths, blowing into the victim's mouth with enough force to cause the chest to visibly rise. Remove your mouth and listen to or feel the air being exhaled. Then deliver 1 full breath every 5 seconds, repeating this cycle until the victim begins breathing. If during the procedure the victim's abdomen bulges, you may turn the victim on his or her side and gently press to expel air from the stomach. You may have to repeat mouth-to-mouth ventilation for quite a long time, but don't give up. Many drowning victims have been saved by efforts lasting half an hour and longer.
You've seen how to rescue an adult drowning victim on shore. We also have a short film which will show you how to rescue a victim in shallow water. Doctor, would you describe the procedure for us, please?
Certainly.
All right, roll the film.
The position is the same as the primary choking rescue position. The rescuer stands or kneels behind the victim and places his arms around the victim's waist. Then, grasping the fist of one hand with the other, the rescuer places the fist, thumb side in, against the victim's abdomen slightly above the navel and below the rib cage. The rescuer then performs the Heimlich maneuver by pressing the fist into the abdomen with a quick upward thrust. Please note, do not squeeze with your arms or press on the chest, as this may cause fractured ribs or serious internal injuries. Here we see another possible rescue situation. A victim being brought inside a stable boat may be draped face down over the gunwale or transom. Press down on the victim's back several times, thus performing a third effective version of the Heimlich maneuver. The various techniques of the Heimlich maneuver, mouth-to-mouth ventilation, are relatively safe, and they can be learned from these demonstrations. However, each method should be practiced gently and under proper supervision.
Well, that's good advice. One more question, though. Unfortunately, adults aren't the only people who drown. Are there special procedures for infants or small children?
Good question. Yes, there are. With an infant or a very small child, you use your fingers in this way, rather than your fist to perform the Heimlich maneuver. Use less pressure, of course. When mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is also needed, place your mouth over the child's mouth and nose, form an airtight seal, and deliver 4 quick breaths, less vigorously than with an adult. Then continue on with the procedure, except repeating the cycle every 3 seconds instead of every 5. Again, keep it up until the child begins breathing on his own or until you're relieved by a trained or professional help. Which brings me to one final point. Once the victim, child or adult, begins to breathe on his or her own, keep the victim calm and warm until help arrives, and by all means, a rescued drowning person should be examined by a physician as soon thereafter as possible. There are sometimes delayed complications after a drowning experience.
Dr. Heimlich, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our demonstration will result in many lives being saved.
I'm sure it will. Before we go, let's review what we've learned from Dr. Heimlich. If the drowning victim has been brought to shore, place him on his back with his head lower than his feet if possible. Turn the victim's head to one side. Kneel astride the hips, locate the bottom of the rib cage, and immediately administer the Heimlich maneuver. Now remember, place the heel of the hand on the victim's abdomen slightly above the navel and below the rib cage. Press into the abdomen with a quick upward thrust. Repeat the Heimlich maneuver several times until water no longer flows from the mouth. In shallow water, place your arms around the victim from behind. Form a fist and place it thumb side in on the abdomen above the navel and below the rib cage. Press into the abdomen with a quick upward thrust, repeating the Heimlich maneuver as necessary. In a boat, drape the victim face down over the gunwale or transom and press down on the back several times. If, after repeating the Heimlich maneuver, the victim does not begin spontaneous breathing, initiate mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Begin with 4 quick breaths, then 1 breath every 5 seconds for an adult, 1 every 3 seconds with a child. Keep the efforts going until you are relieved or until the victim begins to breathe on his own. Keep the victim calm and warm and make sure the victim receives professional medical attention as soon as possible. Water is so very important to us. It covers 3/4 of our world's surface. It makes up over 90% of our bodies. It provides us with beauty, with recreation, with life itself. It is not in water's nature to cause death. We bring that upon ourselves when we are careless or unwise. But we can also be trained, be prepared, be willing to save lives. Dr. Henry Heimlich has shown us how. Now, it's up to us.